So first of all, sorry, I'm a little messy. I need a haircut. I've been working on nibs in the shop. So I may look a little ragged right now, or a little bit like Hagrid from Harry Potter. Recently, I've been reflecting on what it is I've been doing on this YouTube channel. And I think that the core of this channel, and certainly one of the reasons I started it, was to talk about the, essence of a fountain pen, which is the fountain pen nib, right? There's a lot of different components that sometimes go into fountain pens, but in the end, for most people, it is the nib doing its job that is the essential part, right? You can swap in a lot of stuff, but a working nib is it. Now, that makes sense, right? Because I'm known as like a nib person or nib professional, or some say nib meister, whatever it is, right? That's sort of my identity in the fountain pen community. And that's cool. I like it and I revel in it. But it leads me to be, I think, on this channel when I talk about nibs, like a little too serious. Like if you think back to some of these episodes where I focused on nibs, think of it just like how much information I was just jam packing in moment into moment. There was no levity. It was just all business. Like, these are nibs. This is everything you got to know about this topic I'm talking about. I guess I did the nib myths. Maybe that was a little more fun. But you get what I'm saying. Overall, I feel like my discussions of nibs and things related to nibs is on this channel very serious. And it leads me to try to do things that are more fun, but then I stray from the nibs, and I don't know how well those things do. But I have something I want to talk about today that is both nib and fun. It is nib fun. So let's talk about what the nib fun is. So I got this pen a week or two ago. It's the Hero 1086. It came out about a month ago. And unlike a lot of pens from China, it is fairly sophisticated in its construction. You'll understand what I mean when we get into it. But it's an adjustable nib, which means that you can adjust it to have low flow and be firmer, to higher flow and to be somewhat flexible. And it's a cool little pen. I want to show you all of it, take you through it. So let's check it out. I'm Joshua Lax, fountain pen user, collector, a bit like Ollivanders, right? And all-around fanatic. In fact, I'm so obsessed, I started a business where I get to work with other people's pens. But now I want to show you everything I love about the world of fountain pens. From the new pens, to the old pens, the nibs, the ink, the paper, and especially the people. This is Uncapped. So here is the box for the 1086, and as you can see, it's a little bit on the high-end side of packaging for Chinese pens. You see it has a nice printed outer sleeve. It has this nice matte box. It has contrasting glossy details. It's got Hero marked down there in silver stuff, silver foil, whatever. You got an instruction booklet. We'll come back to that. Here is the pen. In addition to the pen, you have a box. It has cartridges in it. I took the converter out, you'll see shortly, to actually work with the pen before this video, but that was in this box as well. So it was 4 cartridges that look kind of like the Pilot / Sailor / Platinum ones. Fairly well made, pretty big size. They have the little metal balls in there as the little cappy things to keep the ink from coming out. In any event, that is the filling options that come with it. You'll see it has a converter, as I said, in a second. Now, the instruction book is actually fairly important, and I'll show you why. So, first of all, it shows you that this is an adjustable fountain pen in the sense that you can turn the knob here on the end of the section, and it causes this metal slider piece to go back and forth. And what it shows you here is that if you send the slider, which I'll show you in person in a moment, if you send it forward towards the tip of the nib, you're going to get a finer line. And if you retract it towards the section, it will give you a heavier line. Now, here is the most important part. Now, I know it's easy to gloss over these instruction manuals in these pens, but this is fairly important, and I'll explain why. So, as you can see in this picture here, right, this is an adjustable fountain pen that has some sort of rotating knob system at the end of the section, right? So what they tell you, and I'll point this out like when we get to the pen, but what they tell you is don't submerge all this into the ink. What you should do is either fill it by inserting a cartridge or filling the converter from a bottle as depicted in this diagram here, and then insert it into the back of the fountain pen. Back of the section where there's like a nipple to take hold of that converter. All this will be clear in a second, but basically what they're telling you is to do that is so that you don't get ink all throughout this whole mechanism situation and then it's leaking on your fingers, right? And it might look much worse than, you know, my little bit of ink splatter from working on nibs earlier today. Anyway, that's what you get in the box, and then the pen, of course, comes in its normal plastic sleeve when you get this stuff direct from China, as I did. And there you have the pen. It's a metal pen. It's, you know, a metal with lacquer on it for the most part. But let me show you a little bit more in depth what this pen looks like and what its features are. So here is the pen outside of its packaging with the cap taken off, obviously. So what I would say to you about this pen is it's sort of reminiscent of kind of the typical Chinese pens that you would see for like $1 or $1.99 on eBay about 15 years ago. That's at least the aesthetics to me. I think the build quality is pretty good so far, although I haven't used this a heck of a lot. But the thing to know is it's basically a metal pen. You have on the barrel and on the cap a black lacquered over metal. Then on the finial and some of the trim, you have like this sort of goldish plating. And then on the clip, this cap finial here, and then on the section is almost like this gold champagne metallic car paint looking finish, which is kind of cool actually. That is sort of contrasted by the metallic plating. So it has some interesting design features. I'm not going to tell you it's the best pen or it's the most beautiful pen, but it definitely to me is like what I think of like the metal Chinese pens that were around when I got into fountain pens. This pen reminds me of it, but I think it's made better. But really what is the pièce de résistance here is the nib. And so I'm going to give you a close up, but you can see it here that there's a slider over the top of the nib. It has a plastic feed. This is a number 5 size nib. Here in where you see these ridges is where the knob to turn the slider back and forth is. And then it's not too fancy, but basically a converter pen, and you'll see that the converter is sort of that standard Chinese kind of imitation of Lamy's nicer converters, to the point where they even put Hero where it would say Lamy on some of the converters. Anyway, it's a fine converter. Obviously, you can see I filled it already to test it out and take a look at it, but those are the basics of the pen. Before we get to the nib, though, I just want to show you what the pen looks like size-wise, in case you can't tell already just from me holding in my hand. So here is a Kaweco Sport in raw brass. Then we have the Lamy Studio in brushed steel, and you can see that they are kind of the same length. Let me move that over just slightly. And then for final size comparison, the SD with the pump piston. So you can see that it is very similar to the Lamy Studio. I would say that the Lamy Studio capped is a little longer. Let's see uncapped how they are, no pun intended. So you can see that the Lamy is a little longer and a little thicker. This pen, the Hero 1086, is a little thinner and a little shorter. So here is the nib close up. You can see it has hero printed on one side and then Chinese characters on the other. It has a injection molded feed, so it's plastic. It's been working well so far, and it's a number 5 size nib. You might have been able to spot that when it was in scale with the other pens and in this pen. On the side here, you can see there's some Chinese characters that have an arrow pointing both ways in between, and then this ridged area here that I'm indicating with my thumbnail. What that's supposed to be, and I'm going to move it a little bit away from the camera just so I don't knock things over, but if you watch what happens, so this slider is now all the way forward as far as it's going to go. I'm going to turn to the left. Sorry, that would be the right. My right, your left, perhaps. And you can see that that slider retracts and it leaves more space. We'll talk about what's going on in there in a second. So here is a view of the nib under a macro lens. So it is ultra magnified. And if we just look at it from the side profile there, you can see that at the end of that slider, you can see like a dark spot. That is actually capillary action occurring between the slider and the top of the nib. So you can see that there's ink gathered there. My hope is that that doesn't really dry out and cause a problem. It seems like it's probably fairly easy to clean that part of it. Cleaning this thing overall may be a little difficult because you're not supposed to submerge the entire nib unit. But in any event, that's a conversation for a different day. What I wanted to show you just is what this looks like, you know, super close up, almost if you were sitting in the room with me. And again, I'll just show you what happens when you turn the knob. So I'm going to twist to the right, and it will start to lower the slider. And you can see that ink splotch right there created by where the slider rests against the nib, and then you slide it forward, and that is all the way. So you can see it's a little off center, but that can be fixed by pushing the nib a little bit over, like so, to even it out. But that's less important right now. What I want to show you just though is, you know, if I press it against my fingernail, you can see that that nib opens up slightly, right? If you retract this all the way, sorry, that leapt out of focus, track it all the way, you get a fair amount of flexiness. Now, one of the other reasons I wanted to show you this close up is just to point out a couple things. Now, this is a number 5 nib, but compared to other number 5 nibs that you see, this one actually has like a fairly interesting profile in that the tines are sort of narrow and long compared to a lot of the number 5 nibs that you see. And you can kind of see that like right over here, sort of at the top of the shoulder right there on either side, right where I'm sticking my nail right there, that it sort of has like a little angled spot on each side. If you think about that, if this continued along that curve, right, it would go in and end somewhere over here probably. That's where the tipping would be. But because of how this is stamped out, it actually has a longer and thinner profile, which is actually, if you look at literature on vintage flex nibs, that's what they were doing, is that they would have a longer, thinner tine on each side that would allow for flexier writing. So this is not really a full flex nib, but the point of the slider is to change the nib from firmer to softer. And by firmer, we mean less flexible to slightly more flexible. And you'll see that in the writing sample shortly. And that is kind of what makes this nib so interesting, is that it is a adjustable nib, and you can adjust the flow and sort of give it as you're writing. Now, this is not the first nib to be released like this. Pilot has had a model called the Justice, then it had the Justice 95. They had a slider that does the same exact thing. I don't have one that I own, or else I'd show it to you, but I have written with them, and I have to tell you, they are not that different, although they're probably a little bit better just because it's like a higher quality nib. But this is, you're going to see a pretty nice nib, all things considered, for $31. And of course, there's the original slider nib, adjustable nib that was made by Wall Eversharp way back in the 30s. That operated on a similar principle. I think it had a lot more flexibility than obviously the steel nib would. But this is not, the point is that this is not a new design. It's just Hero is now doing this at a really affordable price. And so whether or not you love the aesthetics of the pen, the nib itself is super cool. One more thing before we test out the pen. I would say it's a good nib. I'm enjoying using it, the little that I have tested it out. But just to point out, it's not the best quality. So for example, up here, you see the tines right there, the top of the tines. This particular nib, it's a little over polished at the top there, because when you flip it around, you see that it has a decent amount of proximity between the tines, meaning that space between the tines where the pen is going to hit the paper is in pretty good shape. I looked at this under a loupe, and I can tell you it doesn't really have a canyon so much as it's just over polished over here, and looks more correct over here. Sorry, that's out of focus. There we go. So you can see that looks like it's got a pretty nice slit alignment when you look at it that way. When you look at it this way, you can see that it's a much bigger gap between the ends of those tines, and in fact it almost looks like it has baby's bottom right over there. Let's give this a writing test to see how it works and how it writes. Before we get into testing out the nib and writing with it, let's talk about the filling of this particular pen. So if you remember, the instructions showed you couldn't actually submerge the nib to fill the pen, which frankly, in my opinion, is the best way to fill a fountain pen, because it saturates the feed and you get the best writing experience. Today we're going to be using Hongdian. I think it's the bluish gray. Yeah, I have blackish green, I have bluish gray. We'll do the bluish gray. All right, so I had already filled this once, and so the feed is actually probably fully saturated. Let me just wipe this off real quick. Move this here. So what the instructions are saying to do essentially is to fill the converter by submerging the converter end in the ink and drawing up ink into it, and then just wipe the side of it so we don't make it too messy inside. And then all you need to do is put it back in, and voila, you can write with the pen. Now I'm going to surmise, because I didn't actually write with this yet, that it's still flowing. So let's just do a quick test to see. Yep, you can see ink is coming through there just fine. So it doesn't really need time because I'd already put ink into the feed. So let's get some paper and test this guy out. So we have our Tomoe River pad, we have our Hero 1086, and we're going to try this nib with the slider out at various intervals. So I have it as far as it's going to go right now, and we're going to give that a test. So this is going to be, I'm using very little pressure here. So this is the Hero 1086, and the slider, well, we have full slider, we'll call it. You can see with no pressure, you just kind of get basic. This is supposed to be a fine, I guess, but I don't know. My experience has been more wet and writing more like a medium. So that is the slider at its maximum projection, or it's all the way out. Let's just see that. And we'll give it a little pressure, and you can see there's not much line variation even with giving it a little pressure. It's more springy than anything. All right, let us bring this down now. So let's go all the way just so we can see what that looks like. So that's all the way. That's all the way. So we're going to go like right here. So we're going to do, let's call this the 75% test. So this Hero, again, 86. And we're going to call this the 75% slider. I'm going to test this out. All right, so I don't know if you can see it, but you know, these figure eights are getting a little more line variation when you push it. I would say though that this is not a nib to really like go heavy on the flex because you will spring it, but it definitely is springier and has a little more give than the slider at full outness. All right, let's give this a little more retraction. All right, so let's say this is, I think it's about halfway, and you can kind of see that the lines are getting a little wetter as we go. So here's 1086. This is going to be, we'll call it 50 to 30% slider, because I can't really tell at this point. But you can see it is, I guess the lines are sort of similar to what's going on above. Like there's not that much of a difference between what's going on here and what's going on there. Let's see if we take it down. So that's all the way. So we'll come back a little bit like that. Sorry, it's out of focus. So we're probably at like 25% slider. So let me adjust things here. Hero 1086. This is going to be the 25% slider. It may not be all that apparent between here, but I can tell you that some of the strokes just are now naturally heavier. So definitely getting a little more width when you flex the pen. But I don't think it's as wet as that, which is kind of interesting. I mean, that's all right. Yeah, it's definitely flexing more up here, but whether you're getting as much, well, you're getting more shading, I guess, because this is thinner than this is up here, and this was more consistent. It's kind of interesting how the kind of the flow is being affected by that slider. All right, last, we're now in full retraction, so hopefully this is the money shot right here. So we got Hero 1086. This is the 0 slider, which is not really accurate because it's kind of there, but it's, you know, it's the lowest setting. And let's see what we got. We got so having now written it with this, with the slider kind of different intervals, I kind of feel like the instruction manual was being somewhat literal when they said, you know, there's a thin and there's a thick. I don't know what's said in between here about, you know, gradations, but kind of my takeaway from at least my style of writing with this nib and everything is there's really like 3 kind of levels to it. So first there's the slider all the way out, and you get kind of this nice medium line, a little bit on the vintagey side because it has that nice give. It's got a little bit of stubbiness. It's kind of fun. Then you have kind of the mid area for the slider where you're getting like nice wet lines, but you're getting more line variation in terms of it flexing out. And then you have kind of the slider all the way down or almost all the way down, and you get the most line variation, but you also get the least amount of flow. Now that may be just because the feed itself is not great, so it can't be consistent. So as you open this up, right, this is drawing more ink out of the feed compared to what the feed can keep up with. Really, that the feed can't keep up with it. So it gets a little thinner, but you do get this nice shading, right? Because it's like super dark down here and super light. It's got a consistent line. It's writing. It's just not the same as it is here. So it's an interesting kind of way the scale, the sliding scale with this thing works. But all of it is to say is I actually, for $31, am pretty happy with this pen. Like I could actually see myself using this on occasion. I sometimes like to have metal pens, especially like if I'm sitting in sunlight or something. So the fact that you can kind of have like an entertaining writing experience with this while having like something that, you know, kind of can be knocked around, not a bad deal for $31. Would I like to be able to submerge the nib into the ink to fill it? Yeah. Am I a little concerned that if I let ink dry in this, what it's going to be like to clean it out? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, you know, for $31 to get something that you could only get by paying hundreds of dollars for, and it's not really like, you know, let's face facts, like a bunch of the Chinese brands basically will copy the whole pen, you know, from top to bottom. It's kind of nice that although like Hero is sort of riffing on something that's been done before, it's not really like a copy of like an existing pen in the way that like some of the Mahjong pens are, or some of the Moonman pens, though they're the same company. But Wing Sung, you know, all of these things that kind of copy verbatim what other brands were doing. It's nice that you get this in this package that doesn't have that. Not a comment on anyone's buying preferences, but just something that I'm observing. In any event, I say for $31, what the heck? Even if it falls apart in a few years or falls apart in 6 months after a ton of writing, to me, you're getting your money's worth with it. So anyway, this is a really fun nib. I don't think anyone should be afraid of it. It's fairly user friendly, all things considered. You know, really, like you can put a cartridge in it. You can do the converter thing I did. It is, once you get used to kind of like where to grip it, it's really not hard. It's a decent size for anybody who is worried about a pen being too big or too small. It's kind of like in that nice mid level there that, you know, is appealing probably to the most amount of folks. I assume that was a design choice that was made. And, you know, for a number 5 nib, it's writing pretty well. And you get like that kind of like semi-flex, which usually you don't see any outside of Indian pens, things like this. So with all that being said, you know, I think that Hero did a decent job with this. They're, you know, for $31, again, it's not perfect, but it's $31, and you know, it's worth it for everyone to check it out. Now, looking on AliExpress, it is not as widely sold as some of the other pens are. So there's only a couple of vendors that I saw had it in their shops. I did not look on eBay. But in any event, this is, you know, a fun nib in a okay housing. But that's what it's all about. Like I said at the beginning, the fun nib. So I hope you've enjoyed what you've seen today. If you liked it, please like. If you want to keep learning more, hearing about more, please subscribe. I look forward to talking to you all very soon about more interesting and fun and exciting pens and nibs. Speak to you soon. Thank you so much, and goodbye.